My name is Amy Leo. My featured guest on the big screen is Dr. Dicken Bettinger, and we are going to be talking about Beyond the Ego. So, why don't we just get to know you a little bit, Dicken, and your story, and what is the ego, Dicken? How do you see that?
Well, we all have one.
Good start. Okay, so it's relevant. Good, check.
There's a lot of different ways of talking about ego, but you can talk about it in terms of any thoughts or ideas you have about yourself. So often we tend to think of people who have big egos as thinking very well of themselves indeed, and being sort of self-centered at the same time. You can also have thoughts about yourself that are not so positive and think that you're unlovable or not very smart or not very good. And it's normal to have all these kinds of thoughts, positive and negative. The problem only comes in when we begin to identify who we are by those ideas or beliefs. Then we get into trouble. Then we begin to think that who we are as a human being is what we think. And I love the title of this talk, Amy, that Beyond Ego. Because if the point is not to examine your ego, the point is to realize that you can go beyond your ego, and when any of us do that, we become more present.
A little bit loud.
More present, more loving, more compassionate, more understanding. We literally, and we'll talk about this more, we literally can help bring more love and understanding into the world and help raise the overall level of consciousness of the world and help to create a more loving, just world. And in these times, I can't think of anything that's more relevant. So that's why I'm very interested in talking about this topic.
I remember I'm living in Amsterdam now, and I went to a meeting. It was at the Conscious Club, and they were giving a talk on thought. And they did one of, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Byron Katie's exercises, where you really look at a thought and you really analyze it, right? And the leading part of that is they said, think of a time someone made you really upset.
Yeah.
And for me, I couldn't do that. I don't remember the last time that I had an interpersonal relationship that was sticky and tense, and I was blaming someone or trying to avoid someone. So the implications, as Dicken is alluding to, for relationships of any kind, whether it's business or romantic, is infinite. I'd love to hear more about kind of the problems or the difficulties you see, Dicken, when people are up against their ego or trying to let go of their ego or things like that. What are the kind of trends that you've been seeing in your work over the past 30 years?
Well, I could give the short answer, I can give the long answer, and I think at this point I'd like to give the long answer.
Yeah.
I want to start really big if I can.
Yeah.
And I want to start talking about what I've learned from the man who was my teacher, Sydney Banks, and why that has everything to do with what we're talking about right here, and has everything. It's pointing towards something that's immensely relevant for each one of us. Sid was, I think a lot of people probably know about Sid Banks, but he was one of the most, if not the most down-to-earth, ordinary people I've ever met, who had had some insights that were relevant universally. And the first insight he had was that every one of us is living in the world of thought. And that there is some power of thought built into the universe that's continually generating mental activity inside all of us. Otherwise, we wouldn't be alive, we wouldn't be human, we wouldn't be having any experience. And that power of thought generates this, and then whatever mental activity we have is brought to life by this energy. It's brought to life so that we're able to have experiences. So if a sad thought is created, you feel sad. A happy thought is created. Well, right away, this is starting to point toward that we're more than egos. Right away, it's pointing toward we're all connected to an enormous power. Sid Banks says there's no greater power in the universe than the power of thought. Nothing more powerful than that, because it's the creative power behind all of life that creates specific forms in life. It's an infinite creative potential. Now, right away, that alone begins to undermine this notion we're just what we think and feel. We're a creative capacity that's infinite. In other words, we're never just stuck with anything we're thinking. We have an infinite capacity for new thinking. So that begins to, when Sid heard that, he said it felt like an explosion was going off in his head, and 40 years of insecurity just lifted off of his shoulders. To begin to realize that who we think we are is not who we are. That we're not just thought content, feeling content, and behavioral content. Now, I had been a psychologist for 10 years when I met Sid Banks, and the whole field of psychology was focusing on the content of people's experience. What we think, what we feel, and how we were behaving. And whole fields of study and therapy developed under each of those areas: thinking, feeling, and behavior. The whole focus is on what Sid called that which is already created. Right? When we begin to identify who we are is that which is already created, we have a very materialistic view of ourselves and of life. Right? So we begin to think, well, if I have a sad thought and feel sad, I am a sad person. That's who I am. Or if I have a thought that I'm unlovable, I am an unlovable person. Or if I have a thought that I'm better than you, well, then that's obvious. I'm better than you. If we have an argument and I think I'm right, well, obviously one of us is wrong, and I'm pretty sure it's not me. You can begin to see how Sid's first insight, which is revolutionary, there are people all over the world now teaching about the power of thought and how thought creates our feelings, and that our feelings are not caused by external life. They're created from this formless energy, this power, this capacity, this universal infinite capacity to generate experience in human beings. Right? So that alone can begin to help us be less egocentric. It can help us be less blaming. Right? It can help us be less blaming of other people. It can help us take more responsibility and accountability for what we feel. Right? So we become less and less egocentric as we begin to learn the principle of thought. But then Sid said he discovered an even greater secret than that. And it's what some people would call a spontaneous enlightenment experience, where he was suddenly in front of him was a buzzing field of white light and he felt drawn into it. And to a certain point, it starts sounding like many people describe near-death experiences. Except he said, I didn't go part way into this light and then realize that there was more I needed to do in life and then come back into my body. He said, I went all the way through that light to the other side, to before, even before experience, before the five senses. And it was in that instant, he said, he realized he was no longer there as an ego, as a separate individual person with ideas and concepts. He realized directly the truth that all of life is energy. It's one unified field of energy. He realized that this energy can be formless and it can take form, but it's always the same energy. So a metaphor I like for that is the wave in the ocean. The wave isn't just a part of the ocean as a separate part. It's an integral part of the ocean, which means it can't be separated. There is no separation, right? Now, ego is the sense that we're little individual separate people and we're apart from each other and from the very nature of the universe, that we're separate beings, right? Sid's insight, realization, epiphany, enlightenment experience was there is no separation in truth. All of life is the same divine energy, whether in form or formless. So we're all one. And the experience of oneness, Sid says, is love. Now, let's ask for a second, as I have through the years, what's the relevance of this realization for our own lives? Why is this perhaps the most powerful thing any human being, if they get a glimpse of? There is nothing more transformative than the realization of truth, that all of life is a prior unity, and that only our thinking creates separation. Only our sense of ego creates separation. Only our ideas and concepts create separation. That in truth is an illusion. It doesn't exist. Right? Well, to begin to realize then that we're not just what we think, what we feel, and what we do. We are intimately connected. We are intimately connected to the formless energy that generates and creates all of life. And throughout the centuries, people who have intuited the truth of this have talked about three different aspects of that energy that you can say are always true. That energy is intelligent because it knows how to create everything that exists. The formless energy behind life, this infinite field of energy, is intelligent because it knows how to create everything in life and operate it. This is the principle of mind. That the true mind, the mind that's living us, thinking us, operating us, moving us, is this formless divine energy. Well, that shoots to pieces the whole notion of ego. That we're separate beings that are different. And if you have a notion of self that is composed of parts and content, and that's who we are, you always have a psychology of difference. And right now in the world, there's enormous problems because people are focusing on differences and looking for differences and seeing differences, and that's creating all kinds of conflict. Rather than realizing this underlying prior unity that unites all of us. The principles point us toward an infinite, vast identity, what Sid called our true self, as opposed to our ego. Our true self is that which is living us. So the wise have talked about the nature of this infinite, vast field of energy is it's intelligent, or in the case of human beings, we say it's wise, it's wisdom. It's the intelligence that knows how to live us perfectly, how to guide us perfectly. What else can you say about this infinite, vast field of energy? Well, it's a conscious field of energy. And anything that's created in that field or out of that field has awareness and a degree of awareness. So instead of thinking very egocentrically that I have consciousness within me, the truth is I am within a field, an infinite field, a vast sea of consciousness. And it's what allows me to be aware in every moment of something. Without awareness, I wouldn't be a human being. So that points beyond ego to a vast consciousness, which is our true nature. I'm in the witness protection program. I'm speaking heresy now. Watch out. I better. People have been killed for making these statements historically, that we are all part of one united field. Yeah. Okay. So you can say it's awareness is fundamental to the very nature of life. The very nature is wise. It's united. It's loving. It's aware. And as we talked about with the power of thought, it's creative. Right? So 3 different ways of talking about the same energy. 3 different ways of talking about the same energy. Sid said, ultimately, there's only one principle, right? That out of formless energy, everything arises and it's made of that same energy. So it's all one, right? And when we talk about human beings, we say human beings have a mind, they're conscious beings, and they think. And those 3 are the elements, the fundamental elements that allow us to have any experience. The formless energy of life is the inside of life. That which has taken form in us as human beings is the outside of life. So that's what's meant by the inside out paradigm. That all of life is being created from these divine energies, these divine gifts that were given that allow us to have experience as a human being, that allow us to think, to feel, to have sensory experiences. All of those are brought to us by these formless gifts that are operating through us. My wife puts it really simply. She said, well, obviously there's something that's beating my heart and breathing me. Obviously we're connected to something that is capable of doing that is capable of creating human life, that is capable of creating life where no life existed. You look around you in the room that you're in, everything that you see didn't exist at one point. Everything. There's nothing you can look at that at one point was nothing. Right? It's all coming from that same source. So the principles, as anyone begins to explore the principles, they're exploring the connection between formless and form and how they're united as one being. We're human, physical beings, non-physical. And the two together, to begin to intuit the connection, or as Sid would say, if you see the connection between the formless or the spiritual and the psychological, it'll all fall into place. You'll see how everything is being created from the inside out. And if you get a glimpse of that, you couldn't possibly walk around with a very egocentric notion of yourself, right? That you're more than. Our true selves is a shared true self, right? We're all waves on the same ocean. Every wave shares the same ocean, if you will. Every wave is being created and lived and moved by the same ocean, right? The more we begin to fall away from difference, the more we begin to see unity. The more we begin to see that we're not individual separate units, things walking around, that we're more than that, and we're connected to more than that, and we are in truth more than that, and that our essence is that which brings us to life in every moment. That's our essence, our essential nature. Our essential nature, our true nature, right? It's that at core, every human being is loving, wise, aware, and creative. No exceptions. We're all the same. That's our true nature. That's our essence, right? Sid says, if you realize the principles, it always leads you to a sense of unity, and the experience or feeling of unity is love. Which is why I said, for every problem human beings face, love is always, always the answer. Okay, that's my big picture. That's why we're not egos. That's why an ego is an idea that's not true. I hope this is making sense, and I want to, in a while, I want to make this a little more practical, if we can, Amy.
Yeah.
A little more practical now. Yeah, go ahead.
Does anyone have a question first or now that's occurring? Okay, Dickon, well, I have a question. My boss is driving me crazy. How is anything that you said helpful to me in that moment if I don't see it?
If you don't see it?
Yeah. Do I have to work on myself? Do I need to meditate more? What do I need to do, Dickon?
See it. I mean, all of us.
Yeah.
Come on, Amy, that's all of us, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, I don't see it all the time. And when I don't see it, I lose sight of the fact that my true nature is loving and creative and aware, and that I'm intimately connected to other people, and that all of us have wisdom are available to all of us because we're all rooted in a sea of wisdom, right? And so when we lose sight of it, that's another way of saying what ego is. And then we struggle, and then we suffer, and then we have difficulty, and then we take things personally, and then we think that something other than the formless nature of thought is creating our experience. And so we'll blame other people, or we'll blame ourselves even, right? So we're back in ego, and we're back in trouble, and we're back suffering again. There it is. That's all of us at times. The fact that I get caught in my ego and don't see it all the time is, strangely enough, what's helping me have more compassion for people when they get caught up. You know, let he who is without sin cast the first stone is like, it's very hard for me to blame other people for being in their ego when 10 minutes ago that was me. You see what I mean? It's humbling. It's humbling. And there's no end to what we can see. Higher levels of consciousness means you see more and more what's true. Right? But nobody sees it perfectly. All of us fall back into identification with little self as opposed to the true self, which includes little self, but is much bigger. This is why it's wonderful to have conferences like this and have an opportunity to talk about this and to listen. It was, for years, my going to conferences and listening to people talk about the principles, that at some point in that quiet listening, I saw more deeply. I got another little glimpse of the truth that I'm living in the world of thought. And I got glimpses of, it's true, there is a wisdom and intelligence that's living me, right? So that it's very hopeful when we begin to get those glimpses, because it reminds us of our true nature. It takes us out of the world of personal suffering and blame. And as I'm sure you've heard stories, it can be incredibly empowering for people when they learn that the external world and circumstance doesn't define their well-being, and that no one can take love away from us because it's our true nature. We're never not united, right? We're never not connected to a deeper truth. Right? And as we remember that more and more often, or understand that in truth, or realize it, we suffer less, and we're capable of bringing more love and understanding into the world. You want another metaphor? I love metaphors.
Yeah.
Ego. Well, another way of talking about ego is all the personal thinking we do. That's another way Sid talked about ego. It's everything you think. If you think it's true, is your ego, right? So all my personal thinking, all my ideas, my beliefs, my concepts, the metaphor I have for that is, it creates the sense of limitation. So if you think I'm not good at doing something, that thought, if you believe it to be true, you say, well, I'm just not good at that, right? I'm just not good at that. I just can't sing, or I just can't. So we're no longer open to new thinking that would allow us to become better singers. Interesting, I picked that metaphor, Amy. You might have something to say about that. And so the thoughts become more and more limiting. So in a sense, it feels like the boundaries around us get smaller, and our world gets smaller. So in a sense, we begin to think we're living in a small, tight, cramped house. And then you've got all these thoughts and ideas in your head. Let's call those your roommates. So one of your roommates says all your shoulds. So all the time, you have thoughts, well, I should do this, I should do this, this shouldn't be happening, this shouldn't be this, I should know better. I've been studying these principles, I shouldn't be caught up like this, what's wrong with me? Right? That's one of your roommates. You get another roommate who's very judgmental, always has a negative thing to say about everything, right? Very, very easy. Oh, this is no good, I don't like this, you're stupid, I'm stupid. Judgment, that's another roommate. Expectations. Oh, it could be better than this. You're not feeling good, but boy, you could feel a lot better than you're feeling. What's wrong with you? You know, you got to start working on this. Right? So we've got all these roommates, and you can have a whole, pretty soon the roommates are having a party. All right? They become very loud, very opinionated, very judgmental. And you begin to think, well, this is life. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote a play called No Exit. And his definition of hell was being locked in the room with the same people all the time. Well, some of us feel like we've been institutionalized and our roommates are inmates in the institution. And boy, do they have a lot of crazy ideas and opinions, right? Or some people feel like that our life is so limited that we're in prison. Now, here's Sid Banks coming along into the party. And he says, you think you're limited by the walls of this house. Let me show you the door. And you didn't know there was a door. And then you see the door is open. And you go out the door and you go into the backyard and there are none of those voices. It's quiet. And there's no limits. There's no ceiling. There's no walls. It's wide open space. And it's not so dark and stuffy as it was in the house. It's light and there's wind and there's fresh air and there's sky and there's stars and there's further than you can possibly see to explore. Right? So here's the way Sid talked about it then. And this is why I think his enlightenment experience has relevance to every single one of us. He says, any one of you, any one of us can go beyond our concepts and beliefs to a space that's very ordinary, where we're just being ourselves in the moment without being influenced by what we think. So we're not being influenced by our ego. We're not being influenced by our personal thinking. We're just in the moment, being. Sid often used the metaphor of listening. I had one client who said, oh, I don't understand these principles. They're not helping me. This is too difficult. I have no idea what you're talking about. There's a space within that's free of judgments and shoulds and concepts, and it's ordinary and it's available at every moment. We're a thought away from the outdoors. We're a thought away from the outdoors, from the vast outdoors. And I said, okay, there's a secret. She said, I knew there was a secret. I said, okay, I think you're ready to hear the secret. But you got to really listen carefully for me to tell you the secret. And when you think you're really listening with nothing on your mind, I'll tell you my secret. No problem. In 1 second, she goes, I'm ready. And I said, that's the secret. You just stepped outside the door. In that moment, you're completely free of concept. You've gone beyond belief. You're standing in a space that Sid Banks called pure consciousness, which is awareness, any moment of awareness, free of the contamination of human thought, free of concepts and beliefs. It's no wonder that this new book that just came out a year ago is written by Sid, called Beyond Belief: The Early Spiritual Teachings of Sydney Banks. It was it's a huge part of his teaching. He taught, we all live in the world of thought, and as you realize that, you begin to fall out of more and more of your personal thinking. You fall out of your ego into this space of open, vast presence, aliveness, awareness. You become more awake, more aware, more alive, more feelingful. And automatically, when you fall into that space, you become more loving and more understanding. That's the hope. Sid says, if you can take one little step beyond your precious thought system, if you have the courage to go beyond your ideas and beliefs about yourself and life, and if you touch that space for 1 second, it must bring something beautiful into your experience. It must. Well, I didn't want to take Sid's word for that. And I didn't want to take his word that he called that space the ultimate answer. He says it's in that space, when human beings touch that space, that's where they find everything they're looking for. That's where they find insight, inspiration, motivation, aspiration, peace, joy, love, happiness, kindness, caring, creativity, new ideas, solutions to problems, whatever you're looking for. If you want to find them, that's where you're going to find them, right? Step with it. Boy, I tell you, this is getting dangerous now. I'm talking real heresy. I wanted to find out if that was true. So, Amy, to your question, here's an example. I'm in the kitchen with my wife, Kwesi. We're both in low moods. She's being a little critical, and I'm taking it a little personally. Now, in the past, Amy, that would have been grounds for a huge discussion. There is something wrong with you, Kwesi. Why do you have to be so judgmental? Or there's something wrong with our relationship, and we got to figure it out, and we got to talk about this. All right? So here's this notion that if I'm not experiencing love and compassion, it just means to some degree I'm caught up in my ideas and concepts. I'm experiencing difference. I'm experiencing a should or a judgment or an opinion, and I'm thinking that's true, right? So I'm a little suspect. I've gone to too many conferences. I've learned too much about the principles. So I walk into the other room and I sit down. And I just rest in the now. I just listen. I just stop paying attention to what I'm thinking. It's like setting the snow globe down. There's nothing you have to do to quiet your mind down. It will quiet down. Sid says if you really see thought, it will throw you into the now, and in the now you'll find happiness. Well, I wanted to find out, is that true? So I sit there for a while, and as my taking it personally, my ego thinking, my personal thinking, my own judgments, as all of that thinking begins to quiet down, there's something underneath that as I, in a sense, touch that space, I start to feel better. I start to feel more relaxed. I start to feel better. I start to feel more understanding without even trying. When I feel better, I walk back into the kitchen and I look at my wife and I think she's adorable. She's still in a low mood and she's still complaining. And I think she's adorable. You know, when you fall in love with somebody and they're in a low mood and you go, oh, come here, sweetie. Come here. Oh, no problem. No problem. I love you anyways. You're just in a low mood. No big deal. Right? I started to experience that that's true with any person, anybody. That if I get judgments about another person that create feelings of tension or upset in me, when I realize, oh, that's thought, it throws me into the now. If I rest in that space, my personal thinking quiets down without my doing it, without my trying to quiet it down. It quiets down. And as it quiets down, I fall into that space that Sid talked about. He says, if you purify your thinking, which means fall away from the judgments, the shoulds, the expectations. If you purify your thinking, that's love. If you purify your consciousness, that's love. If you purify mind, that's love. Purity is just our natural state of mind that we're born into, free of being identified with the ideas and beliefs that we have. It's our natural state. We fall into it all the time. It's so ordinary. We fall into it all during the day and we feel good and we don't recognize, oh, I've just fallen out of my ego. I'm touching pure consciousness and it's awakening this deeper love and understanding, right? So during the day we feel better, and if we don't understand the nature of the mind and its infinite capacity as love, because that's our nature, then when we feel good, we can blame that too on circumstance or the weather or other people or the fact that you're on a hike or the fact that you're with a certain friend. And innocently then you blame your experience on someone else. That's also a form of ego. It's a misunderstanding. It's not seeing the bigger picture. It's not seeing how we're all waves on the same ocean. It's not seeing that the backyard of every human being is vast and open and limitless and fresh and alive and new. Right? It's just not recognizing what's true. So that's why I love this notion of beyond ego, is that I think as people discover that space within their own being that's already free of concept and belief and idea, we're, as Sid would say, we're a thought away from being in the now. And the now is free of the influence of our personal thinking. If you're in the now and you start thinking about something, you leave the now and you go into the past or the future or the present moment in time. You fall out of personal thinking, you fall out of time. You fall out of thought, you fall out of differences. It's the nature of conceptual mind to create differences because every concept has an opposite, which is why they call it the world of duality. If you think hot, there's cold. If you think I'm not feeling good, well, there's a feeling better. Well, I want to feel better. Well, I don't feel as good. I should feel better. Well, time, just concepts always create dissatisfaction, time, difference, better, future, past, fall out of concept. All of those things disappear. So Sid says, step before concepts of time, space, and matter. Discover that space. Step before the five senses. Discover that space. It's ordinary. It's here. It's a thought away. It's available to everyone. And yet, when you look at adults, most adults, when they're having difficulty or feeling stress, don't fall into the now because they don't realize it's just thought limiting their sense of life. They don't see the illusion of that, or we don't see it, or I don't see it, and then we're stuck in that limitation. But to see it, you fall open. You fall back into the now. You touch that space. It awakens deeper feelings that are beautiful, beautiful feelings. So sometimes Sid called that the state of no thought. He says, if you want to find mental health, if you want to find answers to problems, if you want to find solutions, if you want to find how to feel more connected in your life and your relationships, there's one thought. You're a thought away, and there's one thought. And one time he even said, and you know what that thought is? And boy, did we fall for it. Our egos jumped. He's going to tell us what thought we need to find to have perfect well-being. He goes, it's the state of thoughtlessness. He says, doesn't mean you don't have thoughts, but you're not listening to or attached to any of those thoughts. They're just flowing through the way birds fly through the sky. He says, if you find a state of thoughtlessness, you'll find truth. You'll sense the something greater. You'll feel uplifted in your feeling and get new thinking that's helpful. That's quite a promise. Sid says it must happen. And I wanted to find out, I hope you'll explore this, that you'll see the truth of this, that you'll discover this, that when you fall beyond your concepts and beliefs, just for a moment, just for a nanosecond, there's a feeling of ease or openness or relaxation or presence. Your feeling starts to expand rather than contract, which is pleasurable. So Sid says truth is always found in silence and a nice feeling. That's what takes us beyond ego. I think, given all the craziness of the world right now and the injustices and the violence and the abuse, when we become exposed to that, it's very easy to get discouraged and disheartened. And Sid's message was one of absolute hope. He said, if you see an unjust world and you feel the pain of the people who are suffering and you have compassion for people for what they're going through, if in that moment you fall beyond belief and concept, you'll have an enlightenment moment that will be uplifting. And you'll feel inspired to do something. You'll feel compassion for other people who are suffering. You'll feel motivated. You'll feel uplifted. You'll feel, and you literally, quite literally, are bringing more consciousness into the world, which is why we talk about shifts in levels of consciousness. That insight about truth leads to shifts in levels of consciousness. Why Sid says, if you touch that space, it must take you to a higher level where you see things with more love and more compassion. It must happen. Right? That's how the world will change. We each look within, raise our own level. We're all connected universally to this ecosystem of the principles. And as one part of the ecosystem gets healthier, the whole world gets healthier. Each of us can play a part. It's so hopeful. is so hopeful. Each of us can play a part in bringing more love and understanding into the world. We wake up out of the limitations of our personal thinking. We fall open into the now. And in that space, we begin to fill up with feelings that nourish, that lift our spirits, and thinking that nourishes us, that guides us, that's helpful, that's creative, that's responsive to what's going on in front of us in the world. So I find it incredibly hopeful that each of us can play a part in creating a more loving, more just world. And that's why I was so excited to participate in this conference, because I know many other speakers are giving their sense and they're sharing their insights they've had about how the principles lead us in that direction of creating that kind of a world. So. Amy, I'd love it if we could get some comments or what people are hearing or questions. I've talked plenty, so that'd be great. John will bring you the microphone.
So like what I hear you saying is that we need to find love or humanity, tolerance, or like things around, like in people who surround us. And then what Emmy said is that what could she do if she can't see it? But I would like to ask, if what could we do if we can't see? No, she asked if she don't see it. So what about if we can't see it based on the nature we live in? And to make it more relatable, I'm a Palestinian, so basically it might make sense that as a Palestinian, the nature we live in, it makes it harder to actually see what you're speaking about, like actually seeing the love or like humanity with the other side who you're like cooperating with. So yeah, that's basically what it.
I felt the same way for a long time. I said, well, given my circumstances, it's harder for me. Given what I've been through in my life, it's harder for me to be able to go beyond belief. Well, the now, which is the doorway to a deeper consciousness, is as readily available to every single human being, and I've seen no exception to this. If we have the idea that it's hard, like I had one client I just talked to yesterday, he said, Dicken, for a long time, I thought falling out of my personal thinking into the now was really hard, maybe the hardest thing in the world to learn. And he said, well, Dicken, I know you used to meditate for 4 hours. So I was thinking, well, it's easier for you, Dicken, because you used to meditate for hours and you learned how to do that. Right? And he had this notion. And then at some point, he had an insight that the now is the simplest thing in the world, because it's the one thing you can't do. You can just be in the moment as you are. And as soon as you're just being, you're there. Your mind is open. And if you rest in that being, you will start to feel better. And when you feel better, you'll feel more connected to other people. And it's built into us to be that way because we're already united on a deeper level on a deeper level, you could say in our soul or in our being, we're human beings. Right? On a deeper level, that transcends culture, that transcends differences. Right? Now, when we don't see it, we don't see it. I mean, that's the point, but we can keep looking in this direction. We can keep learning how the mind works so that we less and less are influenced by the thoughts that of difficulty and can't and hard and then all of a sudden one day we find out that this is available to us anytime and any place, regardless of circumstance. I've worked with people in cultures from all over the world. I've worked with people in war-torn areas. I've worked with people who've been victims of horrible violence. I personally have been in war situations where I was sure I was going to be killed, where I had machine guns in my chest and bombs going off all around me and people shooting all around me. And I was sure I would never see my family again. And even in the midst of that situation, I was able to see the role of thought and to fall open. And my fear went away. And I had incredible clarity about what to do and how to act and how to deal with things. And it was life transforming for me to find that even in the midst of that, I could access deep feelings of compassion and love. It's what motivates me and drives me today is some of those realizations that I had in situations that I thought would make it hard or difficult to wake up to thought, fall open, and be guided by a deeper wisdom. Well, I'm very hopeful now. I'm hopeful that anybody in any situation, since we're all humans, we all work the same way, we're all connected to the same love and wisdom, whether we know it or not. And as we have insight into this and understand it more deeply, in a sense, it feels like it just gets easier and easier to know that that's true and to move in that direction and to wake up out of our limiting thoughts. That's a great question. I totally understand that question. Yeah, but what about my circumstance? Doesn't that make it hard? Or what about my culture or my upbringing or my surrounding? Or the good news is that our well-being and our wisdom is formless, so it's unaffected by the things in the world. Can't be damaged or destroyed. It's the source of all of life. It's very, very hopeful. Either a follow-up question for that, or does someone else have a question? Boy, that was a beauty. I mean, that's it's hard to see the simplicity of this until you see it, and then when you see it, it seems so much simpler. There's nothing in the world that makes it difficult for us to be what we are, because we already are that. It can't take away what we are. It can't take away our true nature. It can't damage it. It can't hurt it. And the more you realize that, you become more and more hopeful, even if you find yourself in a horrific situation like a war.
So like, thank you for this. I'm wondering also, like, if this is the case that circumstances should not affect like our own human being, what would be the simplest or like the most effective way to see this understanding?
I mean, I think the person who had the simplest and deepest understanding that I've met is Sid Banks. I would get his book, The Missing Link, and not just read it, but reflect on it so that you begin to experience the truth of that for yourself. I think that's a beautiful way, or one of his tapes or one of his videos. Very, very simply, for yourself too, you can begin to notice, you can begin to realize at any point, this is what I do, I like to see if I can see the connection between I'm feeling whatever I'm thinking. I always am. And when I realize that, I begin to see that a lot of my stress and upset is being created by my own thinking. And whenever I realize that, I'll tell you why that's so cool, why it's so helpful. As soon as you realize that it's your own thinking creating those feelings, it's built into us to let go of thinking that makes us uncomfortable or feel bad. And as you let go of that thinking, you'll see you start to feel different. That's something you can do anytime, anywhere. Look within and see if you can't see the connection between the power of thought and what you're feeling. Right? Here's something else you can do. This is what I love to do this. Just notice in yourself and other people that when our head's clear of what we're thinking, we feel better. Just see if that isn't true. Right? That as we let go of concepts and beliefs and ideas and we're just in the now, that's where we enjoy people, that's where we enjoy life, that's where we feel better. That's how we find peace of mind. That's how we find happiness. That's how we find love. Right? Just notice that. I notice that when my head is clear, I feel closer to my wife than when my head's filled up with lots of negative thinking. Just notice that. You'll begin to see the truth of this. And what we find out is as people notice that thought creates their experience, or people notice that when their head's clear, they feel better and they think better, they naturally move in that direction. You start letting go of more and more of the thinking that weighs heavily on you, and you find out you're not losing anything of value. You become more creative, more present, more awake, more connected. But again, don't take my word for any of this. I think it's important for each of us to find this for ourselves, so we don't just follow somebody else or take their word for it. We see if this isn't true. And I think it's true for everybody. Everybody. If we have time, I'll tell you a story about one of the people that I worked with. But I'd rather see if you have some questions or comments.
Hi, Dicken. It's Amy.
Oh, hi, Amy.
Hi.
Oh,
Good to see ya.
So good. Oh, shivers. I just got goosebumps. Amy is a really good friend, so I didn't even know you were there in the audience. Oh, that's great.
I don't know if you can see me, but I was reflecting on a conversation we had on the phone about maybe dark nights of the soul, or we called it wrestling with God.
Yes.
And these time periods that people go through, and sometimes it's something minor for one person and something major for another, like a health issue or losing one's job. Or I talked to a colleague of ours who spoke about being depressed for a couple of years because of something that was going to happen that threw him into the unknown. So I'm just bringing it up because I think people get the idea that, oh, we're going to be happy all the time if we understand the principles. And I know that we've all gone through these, whatever you want to call them, dark nights or periods of feeling overwhelmed by our conditioned thinking or old habits. And I would love to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah. it's very nice to see that we're part of nature. And just like in nature, there's days when it's really sunny, and then there's days when it's rainy, and then there's days when there's storms, and then every once in a while there's a hurricane or a tornado or something really powerful. We're the same way psychologically. As long as we live in the world of form, we're going to have weather patterns. I think it helps us go through our storms, and we all have them. I do. Amy and I had a beautiful talk about this. I don't know anybody who doesn't have thought storms that stick around for a while. And it's very humbling because we think, well, I should be able to just click my fingers and make it go away if it's my own thinking. But that's ego. That's ego who thinks it can control the weather. That's ego that thinks it can control nature. Right? One of some of the most compassion I've developed is because I've gone through periods of great doubt, worry, upset, insecurity. Now, there's a difference now for me going through those things than before I learned the principles. It's a little bit like if you know that there's horrible weather, it helps to know that the sun is always there, even when there's huge storms. And as my understanding has deepened, when I'm going through my times of confusion or doubt or upset, knowing that wisdom is still there, knowing that love is still there, knowing that, and was something that I've learned recently, Amy, that has really, really helped me, is that I can be having any experience either in my conceptual mind or not in my conceptual mind. And when I'm in pain and suffering and I'm thinking about it and thinking about myself and in my conceptual mind, that pain contracts even tighter and becomes more painful. When I'm in great pain, and for 1 minute I'm just being in that pain without thinking about it, without fighting it, without judging it, without struggling with it. In that moment, and any moment when I'm not in my conceptual mind, the painful feeling starts to expand. So I'm still feeling sad or anxious or upset, but the feeling is opening up. And I find that when my feeling is opening like that, anything is bearable. Anything, I can go through an experience in a different way. Now, do I always fall out of my conceptual mind when I'm in pain? No, but I know that when I do fall out of my conceptual mind, which is just listening, being present, being open, resting there, learning what it means to rest in the now. I had to learn that. As I've learned that, I begin to see even my most painful moments open up enough that enough common sense comes through that I can go on with my life with hope. I can go on with my life with being kind to other people, even though I'm suffering and in pain. I found that that's true whether the pain is psychological. And this year, because I've been through 2 major operations and went through enormous physical pain, I began to find out this is just as true when I'm in physical pain. In my conceptual mind, I become very egocentric and in pain. When I'm not in my conceptual mind, I'm in pain, but I can still be kind to other people. Right? So even in that moment, as your understanding deepens, you go through pain differently. I can honestly say, even through these extended times, it's been very humbling, because I used to think if I understood this, I wouldn't go through dark times or low times. I don't know anybody who's learned these principles who doesn't, because that's part of being human, and there are so many things we can learn during those times. So as my understanding deepens, I'm less frightened of those times, and I still go through them, but I go through them with a different understanding, a different realization that takes the edge off in ways it didn't before, that allows a little more clarity and common sense to come through those painful times and painful moments. It's what I used to call, I'm getting a little better at minimizing the damage when I'm in really low states. So, but we have them. We're human. We get stuck in them.
I'm sorry, I'm giving a lot of questions, but like, let's say that I'm living in the circumstances we talked about, and I see the understanding, but
Yes.
the other side of that I'm facing doesn't see the understanding and doesn't know about it.
Yes. Yes.
Doesn't that make it a one end process? And like that, let's say, like for example, if the other like side continues on behaving the nature him or her or him used to behave on
Yes.
all 2 years, and I'm changing my behavior right now because I understand, and the understanding makes me more peaceful, more loving, more
Yes.
caring, and things like that. Doesn't that make me like more vulnerable or like an easy prey for like the other side?
You know where I heard that the most is from guys in prison. They're afraid that if they let down their guard and began to feel more peaceful and more loving, they'd become more easy prey. The exact opposite happens. As you let down your guard, it just means you're not letting down your guard. You're letting down your thinking that creates fear and upset. When you let go of that thinking and you feel better, you have more wisdom. You're wiser. You're more street smarts. You're better able to protect yourself. This is why they say, in case of, if you're in a crisis, if you're in some kind of horrible crisis, they say stay calm. They don't say think yourself up into a frenzy with upset and anxiety. Because when the more we begin to experience presence, which we can experience in any state of mind. I've seen people in the lowest states of mind filled with hatred, and I say, listen just for a minute. And they set their anger down just for a minute to listen, because you can't think and listen at the same time. There's presence. There's possibility. There's an openness where new thought can come in. There's an openness where these deeper feelings can arise. And so people have to learn that when we feel better is when we're best able to protect ourselves, even if we're in life and death circumstance. We do better with a clear head. We do better in the now. We do better when we are awake in the moment. Right? And that does protect us. And you will get very creative. That's what happened to me in that war zone. I was in Peru in the middle of a war, not as a soldier, but as a civilian. But I was the only North American in that area, and I stood out like a sore thumb. It wasn't hard to tell who the gringo was. I said to people, am I safe here? They said, no. They said, don't walk down any street by yourself. You're a goner. And though I was surrounded by shooting, and I told you, bombs, tear gas. And because of what I understood at that point, I gained a clarity that helped me make really good decisions on how to deal with that and how to get out of there and how to respond to it. And then I came back home and I continued to work to help fight. I continued to work for years and years with refugees and their rights and how to help people get out of areas where their lives were in danger and into a safe environment again. I dedicated a big part of my life to that. Now, the other part of my answer to your question, because again, these are great questions. I really appreciate it. I don't mind you asking a few questions here. You have to understand that if you bring more love and understanding into the world, that's the only way the world gets healthier. And if we're an ecosystem, you are helping the world, whether you know it or not. And it is making a difference, not just where you are, but all over the world. It's helping to raise the overall level of well-being of the world. May I read a couple of quotes that are my favorites about this from Sid Banks? He says, so what you've got to do is raise the level of conscious state of humanity, even a little bit. And it'll get us out of the mess we're in, because you see, when you start to raise the level of consciousness, everybody starts to see different. They start to see more positive because they are heading towards a knowing that is truly a spiritual reality. That's what it is. That's what life is. It's a spiritual reality. Now, translated spiritual reality is unity. We're all connected. We're all one. We're all one human family. It's one earth, right? Most people see only differences. We're different nations. We're different people. I'm different than you, right? I don't like your differences. You have to change your differences for me to feel better, right? That experiment's gone on for centuries. It's time for a new experiment to see what happens when we raise levels of consciousness. So then the last quote is, to direct people back inside is the only way that we will ever have harmony in this world. There is no way peace and harmony can come to the world via the conscious mind. That's from the ego, right? There's no answers from the ego. There are no answers from the outside, but if we travel inside and start to realize that all of life is a conscious state, and as you get into this state, the world will change around you. And you go into harmony, happiness, tranquility, peace, love, and understanding. This is the purest of love. Only this love can solve the world's problems. You must raise the level of consciousness of mankind to find this happiness. I don't know, I've started a 7-month program called Healing the World based on that understanding. That every single one of us can play a part in creating a better humanity. We can all play a part in helping to lift the overall level of consciousness of the world. Right? Just any person, any one of us, no matter what circumstance we're in, people can put a gun against your head and they can't prevent you from tapping into that space where you feel clear and connected and have greater wisdom to know how best to deal with that circumstance. I know that to be true from personal experience, and I know that to be true from the clients that I've worked with. I've never had a client once who became more loving and more understanding, regret it, and wish they could go back to being more uptight the way they were before. even if you were the only one on the planet, even if I was the only one on the planet who knew this, and sometimes it feels that way. It's a beautiful way to live your life. It really is. Less tension, less stress, more compassion, genuinely experiencing more love in your life, seeing that as you give love away, it has an impact on people in the world. But even if you were the only one left on the planet who understood that, there would be no downside for you living that way. Fabulous question. Thank you. Thank you. Looks like we have about 5 more minutes if anybody has anything else they want to say or ask about.
Well, thank you, Dickon, for being with us. I just wanted to really piggyback off what you were saying about one person at a time and how big of a difference that really makes. When I first started sharing the principles, my producer for my podcast, Kelly Munsterd, was my guinea pig. So he agreed to be a guinea pig. I had no idea how to talk about this, which was, a state many of us find ourselves in. And over the course of 2 years together, he really got what you're saying, Dickon. And I was caught up in my own thinking that my business wasn't moving fast enough and I had only impacted, quote unquote, a handful of people, and all this noise getting in the way, ego getting in the way. And Kelly passed away suddenly about 3 weeks ago now. And the impact, what else are you looking for? I found myself asking. The impact in his life from being in a place where he didn't think love was something that was innate. He didn't think love was an energy. He felt like a failure. He battled with addiction. By the end of his life, he said those last 2 years were the most peaceful I'd ever been in my life. And that reflected with his children, with his friends that are here. So don't underestimate yourself or the impact that you're making on working on yourself, not working, on seeing it yourself first, as you said, that Sydney Banks had really been pointing people to. And another thing that I just want to share too is I've always been really taken aback by the state of affairs that we're in, how we treat each other the way we do based on our religion, based on the way we look, based on where we're from. And I just wanted to share a story that a colleague of ours, Mamoon, had shared on Facebook that I thought was so powerful. Again, one person at a time. There was an older Black gentleman in the South, I don't know which state, but what he's been doing over the past few decades is he's been going to dinner with KKK members. He's been in their home and he's been having conversations. And over the course of these 2 decades, I think he's collected over 60 hoods, meaning the people in the KKK left the KKK. They left that racist ideology because that man showed up who he was. And those people who had the blinders on, right, in that group, in that belief system, it dropped. And I think that really shows. No, I'm not saying that it's a prescription, okay? I want to make that really clear. I'm not saying that's something we should all go do. But that man, that's an idea he had. It's an inspired insight he had that he followed and absolutely made a difference in his community. Just as Kelly made a difference with his children. And his son even reached out to me and said, "You changed my father's life. I actually had years with my father that were good years and good memories with him that I wouldn't have otherwise had." So I wanted to share that as we close out today. If there's anything else anyone wants to add or share. But I felt compelled.
Beautiful.
Those things kept coming to me over the course of you talking, Dick.
No, thanks, Amy. That's beautiful. Good place to end. I really think so. Yeah. Hey, thanks everybody for coming. Delight. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. I had hoped I would be able to, but it didn't work out this time. But maybe next time. I appreciate you and I appreciate your questions. Thanks.
Thank you.